because we've been told to wrap up in about 45-50 minutes, including questions. So the speakers are going to speak speedily, and you will ask questions, I hope, short and quick questions. Also, I'm going to dispense with the long introductions to all the speakers because you have them here, and you can look them up there. I will ask each of the, we'll do it like a conversation. And while everyone's getting mic'd up, just to introduce the panel to you, we're missing Sunil, he's not here. But so we've got 4 people, starting with Minakshi Thakur, who's a writer, editor, publisher, commissioning editor with HarperCollins, and also a novelist. Kannan, who you've met yesterday, who is a publisher from Tamil Nadu, runs a wonderful publishing house called Kalachuvudu, as well as a magazine called the Little Magazine, well, called Kalachuvudu in the tradition of little magazines. Aditi Maheshwari, also who you've met yesterday, who's one of the organizers of this event, and is one of the directors of Vani Publishers and runs the Vani Foundation and does as a woman of many parts. And Jane, who works with, Jane Camens, who works with South Asian literatures. And I'll ask each of them to tell you a little bit about themselves and their work, and we'll just take it from there. So I need a mic also. Okay, so what we're going to do, welcome everyone to this session. Even though the broad rubric of the session is to talk about South Asian literatures, as it happens, the people on the panel, the Indians on the panel are Indians. They're not from any other country, so I imagine that they will basically focus their remarks on India. And Jane, you are the sole representative of the Western world, or whatever you might call the outside world. So I'm going to ask you each to speak from your perspective. Now I know that Minakshi, Kannan, Aditi, in each of the languages in which you work, you have all been trying in some way or the other to reach Indian, possibly South Asian literatures beyond the borders of our countries. And I'd like to start by asking you to talk a little bit about how easy or difficult that has been. What are the issues that you face, especially with Aditi and Kannan, those issues I imagine would get much more complex because you're working in Indian languages as opposed to working in English. So if you could just address that. Minakshi, would you like to start, and then we'll take it from there?
Hello. Yes. So at Harper, can you hear me? Yeah. At Harper, I've set up the Hindi publishing list, and I also run the translation imprint, which is called Harper Perennial, wherein we translate literature from the languages, from Indian languages and some foreign languages to English. And as far as your question is concerned, Urvashi, it's been tough. It's very tough to make our books travel outside of India, especially when it comes to selling English rights to books in the US and the UK. It's slightly easier selling rights to the European languages, but US and UK have been a huge challenge so far. That's what I think. And selling rights to English, Hindi books, translating Hindi books to English or your other European languages abroad is easier than selling rights to English novels or short stories abroad.
But you mean
that's what I've found.
Selling English rights would mean selling to
English
England and the UK, US, Australia.
Yes.
So, or Canada.
Yes.
And that's difficult.
Yes.
More difficult than
Europe is more open to translations or publishing books with an Indian context. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, which is not surprising, because as we know from statistics of many European countries, that many European countries translate a lot from outside. So there is a kind of openness to the foreign literature anyway, which the UK, US markets don't have.
Yeah.
Australia perhaps is a little more
Yes.
open to it.
Yeah.
Yes?
Australia is likely.
Yeah, yeah. Kannan, how many of your entire list, how many books have you sold from Tamil into international languages beyond the borders of South Asia?
It can easily be counted. I have done.
Can you hear Kannan?
Can you hear me?
Really, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have sold 4 rights on the whole. I have been working in Frankfurt since 2007 for three novels to 3 languages. On the whole, 4 rights. 2 rights to German, 1 to Galician, which I worked with Urvashi on doing that, and then 1 to French. And when I first went to Frankfurt, I had 2 agendas. One, of course, to buy rights for world fiction, which I want to translate into Tamil. Also try to translate Tamil fiction. I basically publish literary fiction and non-fiction into European and other languages. So I have to work in 2 levels, which I understood earlier on. I have to work with editors like Minakshi and others, and first get them into English. And once I have a well-edited, translated, published copy, then I take that and then I to go to Frankfurt or London and try to sell them to international publishers. But it has been a very difficult task, and I think I have spent more money in printing rights catalogs, than actually selling rights.
But I think there's Kannan has a really interesting story in reverse, which you should tell. The first time he bought rights to Marquez.
Marquez and Pamuk.
Yeah, and Pamuk. I mean, the persistence required for that. Do you want to just tell the story? Because that persistence, I don't think works the other way.
No, so I went to Frankfurt first under this Frankfurt Book Fair Fellowship program, which I got selected, and I had no idea how this right state works, and I had no idea how Frankfurt works. And it was, when I first went to New Delhi Book Fair, I was completely taken aback. So you can imagine what happens when I went to Frankfurt. So
now he's a pro.
So I had not made any appointments because I had no contacts and I didn't know how to do this. But as I was traveling with a team of international publishers, I got to know a bit of how things work. And then while I went, I had 2 names in mind that my friends, my translators who want to translate, they wanted to do Pamuk and they already wanted to do Marquez, and they had given me that, no, don't come back without buying this. And of course, I can't make appointment with Wileys or big agents on the spot, which I didn't know, of course. So I went to their stands. I saw their thing on the directory. I went there, and I was just standing there. Of course, I had nothing else to do in Frankfurt. I had no appointments, so I had all the time. So I was standing in the stand, and finally somebody came to me, asked me why I was standing here. So I want to buy these rights. I said, you can't meet us now. I said, okay, I'll give you my card. Please give me the card of the editor. I'll take it and go. So that's what happened. And then I came back and I emailed them. Over the next 2 years, I got both the rights. So.
And he published them in Tamil, but he just stood there. Can you imagine, at the agent center? Aditi, have you tried, I know that you do a lot of translations within India, translating out of Hindi into Indian languages, but you have not in the past, from what I understand, had much of a presence outside, trying to sell the rights to your books outside. Have you tried that at all? Have you had any success? Is this something you're thinking of? What problems have you faced? What do you envisage?
A lot of A lot of Vavani's authors have traveled a lot in Europe, Australia, US, UK, and most of these communications were initiated through Vani. But it somehow so happened that we got to know in the end that the author has directly signed off the rights. This was my father's generation, and I think the biggest flip side of being in a family managed business is everybody is a family. And if we would complain over cocktails or chai in the evening, so all we would come back home with from the author would be a next book commitment, but the foreign rights would be sold off by the author themselves, despite Vani being the initiator. So I think there we learnt our lessons very, very, I mean, after a lot of difficult situations, that
we need to really respect the copyright agreement, which most Indian authors, at least of the senior generation, do not do. Apart from that, I went to Sweden, for example, a few months ago, to Norway, and I found so many of Vani's authors already being published there, very respected in the Swedish language by their critical circles, but Vani has no clue about it. So because the authors have written, and then the authors complain that we've never heard from the literary agent, we don't know how our books have done, how they have fared in the international market. But for that you have the publisher to take care of these things, and you need to trust the publisher. But I think the things are changing now with this generation, and my two of the books are traveling almost to 4 European languages, and and one in Urdu in Pakistan, and another one in Australia. So yes, we are up there, and if you talk about the other way around, then we've done, I mean, Salman Rushdie, Herta Mueller, you name it, and we've done about 8 manga comics. Now Marjan Satrapi is going to be out. So, and we really respect the literary agents, the publishers, and you really can't go wrong even with one spelling on that copyright page. You know, they're so strict, and that's how it should be. But I think the Indian language authors would learn gradually and would cooperate. I hope so.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, actually, this what the two of you are talking about is more how to get out the information about the writers into an international marketplace, which is not familiar with the, you know, the many with this very complex literary and marketplace or whatever. And what you're talking about is a slightly different thing. That's also included, but more the business that within India, Indian language publishers very often operate or have hitherto operated in this very familial kind of way, where contracts and things have not been clear, and therefore the situation of taking literatures outside becomes very murky.
No, contracts are very, very clear.
No, I'm saying contracts may be clear with you, but it's not the case with many, because we have not been used to, many language publishers have not been used to selling rights outside.
Right.
So there is a lot to be learnt from there. So Jane, let me turn to you. From looking at it from the outside, as an editor, if you are seeking out, let's say, essays, articles, whatever, to publish in a journal, or imagine that if you were a publisher's editor and you were looking to publish books from this part of the world, how would you even, I mean, what would you see? A great big blank, or a great wealth, but not knowing how to access it? And how would you even begin?
Is this on?
It's on, but it's made for men's lapels, so it doesn't work that well on women.
It? Ah, there we are.
Yeah.
No, I don't see a great big blank.
It's true, no? All these hand mics are made for men. Yeah, sorry, Anjali.
I see, if you like, a literary cacophony of many, many things. But in terms of choosing the work, I'm interested in the quality of the writing. I'm interested in a story that is different. I'm not interested in telling the same story. But I've got to tell you, my role as an editor was on that one publication, or certainly at the moment, that one publication. And I think perhaps more interestingly to this panel, maybe to the audience, is the Asia Pacific network that I run, and all events that I hold in other parts of Asia, including, I hope, coming back to India. Now, I know that when we're talking about South Asian writing finding an international market, aspirationally, writers often look to the West, to the UK, to Europe and to Australia. But let's start opening up our minds to the huge and growing market that is the rest of East Asia. You know, just as the Indian market is beginning to develop, mature, and grow in readership. So is the rest of East Asia. So is Malaysia. So is Singapore's a small market, but it's sophisticated. Korea is sophisticated. China. Now we're looking at big numbers. And we're looking at ways, of course, to access that, finding ways in. What I try to do in the small events that I hold is introduce people, just as this event is introducing publishers and literary agents to each other. I've also got authors coming to the events that I run. So it's ways to get to know writers from different markets. And I think that it needs to be a reverse psychology as well, that not only do we start to look at those markets in Asia and the Pacific, if you like, but of getting our work, of South Asian work there, but of starting to look at what they've got and whether their stories cross into the psyche of readers in South Asia. Start to open those gates, because, you know, we've in a lot of the times, the work that's come from East Asia has been mediated out of the UK and the US. So those works have often been decided by what the US and the UK find interesting. Now, that's not necessarily so when you're looking at markets out of Asia. So I would say that when we're looking at extending the market, that we look in a much broader way.
Broader way, yeah. I think that's, it's, you know, each one has pointed out something really interesting and quite distinct. So the two things that I'm taking away from what you're saying, one is the importance of familiarizing literatures and writers with each other through this process of meetings, discussions, workshops, etc., where you actually, I mean, a personal interaction can very often lead to something really interesting, or where you hear a writer speaking and you can be interested. And the other is to look at international, not only in terms of English or the US and UK, which I think increasingly everybody's doing, to make also South-South connections and to work with other countries, even though it might mean smaller thing.
Starting small, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to, the markets are immature, and but we're at a stage where we can help it grow.
Yeah. So, you know, we're going to do this slightly differently because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to ask you to come in now with your questions, but also ask the panel to perhaps reflect a little on, I mean, these are some of the issues, the methods of moving beyond those. Yesterday we heard a lot about the different translation programs that exist, which help, you know, if you want to access a foreign literature and the language is the barrier, and if there are subsidies to help translations, or if translations, short translated pieces are made available, you at least get a flavor. Whereas from here in India, and I think in much of South Asia, there is hardly any funding for translating our literatures out. You know? So that's something that, would you like to comment?
I really miss that, an organization that would subsidize translation. ILA had begun to do that, but we need something more solid and more organized, which will start funding translation. And the other thing is that we'll have to start exchanging books. We can't just expect others to buy our books and not take books from them. But the market will have to be conditioned. So that awareness, bring authors here. If you're publishing authors, have like organized tours, that will require money. So we need a funding organization, like you said. And because India is growing, India publishing is growing at such a steady pace, on some of the translations that I take from foreign languages other than English, we do get world English rights. They give it to us and not to the US and UK. They will give us 2 years' time to try and sell, and then it reverts. But that is a nice gesture. That's a huge change. And if we do that, if we create awareness for those writers in here, maybe they will be, other publishers abroad will be more open to our writers who we publish over here. So that is one idea, but we don't have a concrete plan yet. How do we go about it?
May I say something? I have a real mission, if you like, to try to bring in the universities in a stronger way to supporting creative writing and literary translation in India and the rest of East Asia. As you know, creative writing is not taught within the curriculum in India, nor in most of East Asia. If you look at something like the British Centre for Literary Translation, that's run out of a university, out of the University of Norwich. Now, there's no reason why some of these states shouldn't start to look at their languages and support them in centres for literary translation from their languages into other languages with visiting scholars. Likewise, the creative writing centres don't always produce novelists and poets, but what they might produce are the translators from their own language into other languages, depending what they're learning to writing. So the literary translation and the creative writing can work hand in hand. So I'm on a mission to knock on doors of the institutions to start to support the culture of our countries, and I think that we're very good at learning English literature, Jane Austen and everybody else, but let's start looking at the contemporary writers in the countries.
Right. And I think that's at a very different level, at a very, very, if I would say at a very mature level of connecting a lot of things together. But here in India, I feel very sad to say that there wasn't really an award or a platform to recognize translators who were working between Indian languages. So our Academy of Letters, Sahitya Academy, would give away these awards every year for translators and authors of all the Indian languages. But they were not considering a very important part of that whole ecosystem, and that was comprised by the people who were connecting two parts of India, two languages of India. And that's how Vani Samanvay Distinguished Translators Award also came into being, where we decided that let's come out and identify those people who have been connecting two Indian languages to begin with, without use of English or Hindi for that matter. And this year we gave it away to Atul Ravi Vermaji, who has been tirelessly translating between Malayalam and Tamil for last 35 years. So
that's great. Kannan, you wanted to say something, or did I interrupt?
That we do need an agency to support translations, also to take our books to Europe and America and to other parts of the world, but also that we need an agency to promote writing within India itself. From among the Indian languages, after Thakur and Premchand, I don't think we have a national hero that all of us recognize. So because there is nobody who gets translated into all the languages, and that happened as a part of the national movement, and that's not going to happen probably again. So first to translate among Indian languages, and once we have these great writers who are recognized in India, because when you go to Europe and talk about a Tamil writer, unlike a popular Indian English writer, they have not heard about it.
They've not heard about it.
So it's that more difficult. So funding is important first to do this, create these icons of literature within India from the Indian languages, and that would help a lot when you take it to the world.
And I think the point that Jane made is also interesting, because immediately you think of an agency to promote translations, you think of state funding for such an agency, and states are typically very nervous about writers and the sort of things that writers might say, whereas if you were looking at other kinds of institutions which have a measure of independence built into them, you might be doing something, you might be able to do something better. Anyway, please, if you have questions or if you have things to add, because there are many publishers in the audience, we'd be delighted to hear from Sue here.
Can you hear me? No. I'm Susan Hawthorne from Spinifex Press in Australia, and I'm also a writer. One of the things that I heard yesterday is that there is an agreement between Mr. Modi and our government to support strategic business. So we possibly need, and I did ask the Australia Council about this, and do books fit into this kind of thing, and could there possibly be subsidies for translations from Indian languages into English? And there was a kind of, yes, maybe, but you need to put forward a good case. So there may be some opportunities there, and I hope they don't get flooded, but if they do get flooded, then it will show that there is an interest perhaps in this. So I think there could be some openings coming forward, and that agreement lasts for 5 years, so don't wait too long.
I bet there won't be any room for feminist books in there. Yes, sir. I'll come to you.
Just taking off from where Susan spoke, I think there is a basic need to defend the values that you stand for, and today we are all global villagers, so we need to defend global values. And what Aditi mentioned about language translations, I think forms the key to standing up for where we are in terms of how we link together, rather than through the medium of the West.
No, but that's an interesting, important point, but this panel is discussing how to reach Indian literatures outside.
Right.
That's why and we're not talking about the West. The outside is much bigger than the West.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, thank you for pointing that out. There's somebody at the back.
This is just a very brief technical comment relating to what is it Susan from Spinifex said. In Britain, actually, we have funding, and also in many other European countries, we have funding which funds, which supports translation into the language of the country. So Arts Council England, for example, gives an amount of money which is, I think, something like 120,000, it's not huge, 120,000 pounds sterling to PEN, English PEN, to distribute this in the form of grants to British publishers to publish translations. Maybe the Australia Council might look at this possibility.
Good idea, good idea. Yes, sir. This gentleman here.
Hi. I just want to ask, is there any standard platform apart from these events where the publishers can really link up and find out what kind of works can be translated within India and what kind of rights? I mean, apart from going to Frankfurt Book Fair, standing at a stall, what else can you do? Like, is there any platform, ready-made platform?
There is at the World Book Fair in New Delhi. The National Book Trust holds a rights table every year for 2 days, where you can meet other Indian language publishers and the Indian English publishers and some overseas publishers as well. It is very cheap actually. You just have to pay 2,000 rupees something, and they give you more food than the amount you have paid.
Anyone else? Yes, there's a question there.
Hi, I'm Preeti Gill. I've lately become an agent, so I was wondering whether this is something that agents should be taking on more seriously. I think they have a large role to play, especially for translation and trying to promote that, because if you take up a book that you're, or a region or a language that you're really interested in, or a literature that you particularly like, I think it's the role of the agent, or also sort of a responsibility that you take on to promote this. And so, yeah, somebody could talk about the agent and how you can help in promoting books for translation.
Yes, I think that's very important. It's beginning to happen now, but I think more and more agents should take up translation as a module of what they do, because this is it really creates a proper channel. It adds more value. The publisher will also attach more importance because there will be a deadline, a reading deadline. There will be, because you will push me to give a respectable advance to the translator and the author. The translator will get paid well, will get part of the future royalties. I think it will encourage people to do more translations, and it will encourage the sales guys at a publishing house to push them better in the market too.
Anyone else wants to add to that?
I think yes, we definitely need literary agents for Indian languages for the same reasons, and for also the fact that the literary agents, especially working in the space of Indian languages, would have to be very sensitive about the shared commonalities and the points of divergences between our own, what should I say, unitary identity of being, of belonging to one single country. So I think we desperately need somebody who can, start talking and can start facilitating the interaction between various parts of our own country. Yeah.
And the other point is that we hugely rely on sources in the various languages to find out what book is doing well, which author should be translated, which books are translatable. We rely on journalists and writers in those languages. We have to find people to get those books read. For instance, if he sends me books, I have to find someone else to just take a second opinion. That will become easier if agents come into the picture.
And as yesterday in one of the panels, this was a point of discussion, that how Sahitya Academy and National Book Trust have made it easy for themselves and therefore difficult for everybody else in years to come, that they would translate between Indian languages via English, which is I don't know what to say about it, but I think if we have literary agents there, we can really, safeguard the situation, and we can really save the texture of our own literatures by not depending on English or Hindi for that matter as the linked language. We can get direct translators.
I think I have to beg to differ on this actually. I have to say I have a horror of literary agents, even though Preeti is my ex-colleague and I wish her well and everything, but I think they should, we've got enough middle persons in publishing. I mean, we are the middle people between the author and publisher, author and the readers. There's nothing to say that a literary agent based in, let's say, Delhi can purvey the entire corpus of Indian language literatures to the international world or even within India, because they are as constrained by language and location and all of that as publishers are. Also, I think the thing is that much of the experimentation and much of the new stuff in a multiple publishing environment like India comes from the independent publishers. It's not the big guns who discover new people, it's the smaller actors. And literary agents stepping into the field just wipe out the smaller actors, because we can never pay them, and that means that everything will be sold only to those who can pay. It defines everything in terms of money, and the book publishing industry does not have that kind of economy that you can actually base everything on the kind of advance you receive. So I really have a horror of literary agents, and I think they are the death knell of the independent publishing industry.
Okay, so just connect and don't catch publishers by don't ransom. Something
It all becomes a matter of money. Anyway, there's a question at the back. Let's take it. I know I'm a loner on this. That gentleman right at the back.
No, you're absolutely correct there. Right. Absolutely correct there.
Hello, ma'am. The question from a knave writer, and a knave question. If I'm a writer and my books have been published by a publisher, and I've written up the agreement, whatever the publisher has told me, and the publisher is not taking it abroad and not translating it, what can I do about it?
Talk to your literary agent.
Ma'am, like you, I don't have a literary agent right now.
There's one sitting right over here.
Catch hold of her.
Catch hold of her.
Also, ma'am, one small question. Is there a forum or a website or some place where I can find out that any of my books have been translated into other languages without my knowledge?
No, I don't. I don't think, well, would you like, any of you like to answer
No,
that?
I think my publishing house discovered that our books were translated 8 years ago and is selling well in another territory.
As long as it's selling
So you
well,
have to
we
travel.
actually feel grateful about it.
No,
Don't we sometimes?
It was beautiful to just read Vani Prakashan on the
Yeah.
copyright page in the language that I don't understand,
just-
but
Yeah, you
no
feel
one
good
knows
for the
about it.
author at least.
Yeah.
You do.
There's a question here.
Hi, so I'm Tanvi Mishra and I'm a copyright lawyer. So what you just said was exactly what I wanted to know. We talk about content, we talk about the players being the publishers and the authors and the translators. We talk about the literary agent. Do you really bother about the copyright law and how it can actually earn you more if you get your contracts right? And I mean, if Vani Prakashan had known and taken action, I mean, you came to know 8 years later, but you could still have taken action and done something about it.
Tanvi, you just walked in a little late.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Because the first part of my statement was that the biggest flip side of being in a family managed business is that everyone is a family. So when you complain to the author that why did you do this, you know, why did you surpass the agreement, all you'd come back home after a chai or a cocktail in the evening is the promise for the second book from that author.
But what about internationally, when you're going abroad?
Right.
I mean, your books are getting translated without your permission.
Right.
Doesn't that pinch? Somewhere where...
Somewhere? Everywhere. But see, the thing is, I tell you, you have to just look at the situation and you have to just understand what best can be done from it. So when I saw, for example, in Sweden that 3 of my books are doing there and they are on shelf even after being printed for so many years, I understood that this genre works, and fine if this author could, I mean, if this was a messed up situation, I know that some groundwork has already been done for me to get my next books there, and I'm going to do that.
So it's making the best of a bad situation.
Hi. So we spoke about books published by publishers. Now there are a lot of self-published authors who are really interested in coming to India. So what is your stand for taking up only translation rights of these self-published authors abroad? Are you interested in their books and translating them in India, or because then again comes self-published authors don't want to really give away all their rights in terms of e-book rights. So as an independent agent or a publisher, would you be willing to take only translation rights of these authors?
But I don't actually, I'm not sure all of us understand, because if the author is self-published, why would she want to go to a publisher then?
Because to come to India and into the
You're saying self-published outside of India?
outside of India, and if they're interested in coming to India and say translated into Tamil or Telugu or Marathi, is that something that agents in India or publishers in India are willing to take up?
I think it's, you know, I think it's, am I audible? Yeah. I think it's not about the author or the literary, I think content is the queen. A good story is a good story, whether it is published by a publisher or published by the author or in any format. A good story is a good story. So if you make a pitch and if it clicks, yes, anything.
I don't know, Jane, what do you think? I mean, if it was a self-published writer wanting to come into a Southeast Asian country, would they be willing to take up limited rights?
I think a lot of our authors, in fact, are self-published, and they do their best to sell into the publishers they meet there. You know, I think it's a very individual thing, and I think it's whether or not the story gels with the publisher. It's really just selling, again, publishing rights. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, do you have any other questions? We've got 5 minutes. Yeah, there's one. Do you mind if I take the one at the back first?
It just continues.
Okay.
So just a quick answer. I think if the person has self-published, then they have to realise that in fact they have taken on the role of the publisher, and so they need to represent their rights and do the work that publishers otherwise do. So the news needs to get around that actually publishers work on behalf of authors, And so that's one of the things that you get when you publish. So it's kind of, you know, the horse is already bolted in a way for those writers. But if they're good self-promoters, they probably can do it. And they need some funds as well.
That lady at the back.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask all the panelists, especially the ones from India, which languages do you publish from and to? Like probably Harper Perennials, maybe from Indian languages to English, but I'm not very sure. So if you could just elaborate.
No. Let me just say that I've only,
Yeah.
I was publishing only I was publishing in English, and so everything that came to me was in translation or originally written in English.
Minakshi?
Yeah, Harper Perennial covers translations from the languages, Indian languages to English, and we also translate books from various languages to Hindi at HarperCollins. The imprint is called Harper Hindi.
Kannan?
Yeah, we publish only in, can you hear me? Yeah, we publish only in Tamil, but we translate from many languages of the world literature into Tamil. Original writing only Tamil, we don't do anything else.
And we publish
Hindi, Urdu, and now English, and we've translated from about 18 languages from in India and abroad.
And we publish in English and very little in Hindi. So we translate from many Indian languages into English, but we work very closely with publishers in the languages like Kannan or like Ravi DC and Sunil Mehta and others, working for our books to be translated into the languages in which they work. So in a sense, you try to expand the markets wherever you can. Okay, do we have another last question or not? We don't. Okay. So in many ways, I think the points that have come up, they're not unfamiliar to all of us about really the problems of reaching literatures into spaces which are not familiar with those literatures, and making, creating an awareness. And we've talked about the ways in which this can be done through meetings and discussions, the sort of institutions which could possibly house translation programs with less interference by the state, the taking advantage of state largesse in certain ways, if you can, while it lasts, and also sort of functioning through literary agents, which all of you find very helpful. And then really just the questions of looking at new markets. So not carrying with us, at least in India, our colonial heritage of thinking that everything it needs to be directed towards the UK and the US, which in fact are the most inward looking and parochial of markets despite their size. They're really not interested in anybody other than themselves, and also stuff that travels from English, really.
Right.
You know. So just looking at other markets and informal arrangements like exchanges and all of that, which I think gives us some kind of agenda for the future. So thank you all for raising such good points. Thank you for listening and doing this speed session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.